Welcome everyone to our Wednesday evening Bible study. Today is June 29th, and we're thankful to God that we have the opportunity to study a portion of his holy and divine word. This evening we'll be only in two specific books of the New Testament, Luke chapter 22 and John chapter 33. Luke 22 and John 33 will be our two sections of scripture. And we will be on page 366, which is chapter 151 in our book. The title of tonight's lesson will be Judas Left the Passover Feast. It is time frame. It's hours before Jesus will be arrested. It's after the Passover meal, after the institution of the Lord's Supper. And now Judas will be leaving the Passover feast to go betray Jesus. So we'll be looking at that. And the duration of this study will be focused on Judas as a character, something that we may, in our own personal study or group studies, may or may not spend as much time on studying specifically him as an individual as we do other disciples. So we'll give today's class entirely over to studying Judas, studying Judas's reaction and interaction throughout this section of scripture. Okay, I'm going to read chapter 151, and then we'll have two readers prepare themselves for Luke 22 and John 13. But first, let me read chapter 151 just to set the tone overall, especially because Luke only has three quick verses. John gives more detail. So our author will tie all of them together, which will be a lot easier to follow in your initial hearing. After Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper, he said, "But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table." Then Jesus reiterated the woe that he had spoken previously in the Passover meal over Judas. He said, "The Son of Man will go as it has been decreed, but woe to that man who betrays him." The disciples were still not sure which of them it would be that would betray Jesus. So Simon Peter signaled to the disciple whom Jesus loved, who was sitting next to Jesus, to ask Jesus whom he meant. The disciple whom Jesus loved leaned back against Jesus's chest and asked, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus responded, "It is the one to whom I will give the piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." Then Jesus dipped it in the dish, a piece of bread, and gave it to Judas Iscariot, son of Simon. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, Satan entered him. And Jesus said to Judas, "What you are about to do, do quickly." None of those present understood why Jesus said this to Judas. Some supposed that Judas had the money bag. Since Judas had the money bag, Jesus told him to buy what was needed for the feast, or that Jesus told him to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas accepted the bread, which Jesus had dipped in the dish, Judas left the Passover meal. And it was night. After Judas left, Jesus said, "Now has the Son of Man been glorified, and God has been glorified in him." Jesus also said, "If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify the Son, and he will glorify him immediately." All right, let's have two readers. Luke will be a quick reading, 22 verses 21 through 23. And then our main reader will read John 13, 22 through 32. Luke 22, 21 through 23 is a quick reading. And then we'll have our main reader read John 13, 22 through 32.
I can read the Luke passage.
Thanks.
You said Luke 22, 21 through 23?
Yep.
All right, it says, "But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table. The Son of Man will go as it has been decreed. But woe to that man who betrays him." They began to question among themselves which of them it might be who would do this.
All right, thank you. And then our main reader, John 13, 22 through 32. John 13, 22 through 32.
I can do that as well if no one's available.
Sure, go ahead.
All right, 22 to 32.
Yes.
All right, here we go. It says his disciples stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, "Ask him which one he means." Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." Then, dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. So Jesus told him, what you are about to do, do quickly. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. Since Judas had charge of the money, some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the festival or to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night. When he was gone, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself and will glorify him at once."
All right, thanks. Okay, we have 5 questions here. One is, do you think Jesus could have done anything or said anything that would have dissuaded Judas from betraying him? Satan entered Judas's heart. Did Satan force his way into Judas's heart, or did Judas welcome him? What do you think? Jesus told Judas, what you're about to do, do quickly. Why did Jesus tell him that? What do you think? How had Jesus been glorifying God? What do you think? And Jesus said that God would glorify the Son at once. Did Jesus expect that God would glorify the Son by raising him up from the dead on the 3rd day? What do you think? All right, a couple of things here. Questions 4 and 5 are similar. We'll look at those together in a second. Question 1 is asking us hypothetically, do we feel Jesus could have done anything or said anything to change Judas's mind? So we'll look at that one separately. 2 and 3 are separate too. 2 is Satan entered Judas's heart. Did Satan force his way? And 3 is what Jesus saying, what you are about to do, do quickly. Why did Jesus tell him that? A couple of things to look at. Just remember where we are. Jesus has already washed all of their feet, including Judas. He's already celebrated the Passover meal, which was remembering the death angel passing over the homes that had the blood of the lamb. It was celebratory, and it was a festival, feast, holiday to celebrate the deliverance of the Israelite people. And also Judas was present for establishing the Lord's Supper, where Jesus was telling them about a new covenant, about a promise to partake of this in the future, in the kingdom, and about the body of the bread representing the body, which is broken for many, and the cup, fruit of the vine, representing the blood, which is shed out for the remission of sin, right? Judas, all those high points, Judas was sitting there. And Judas was there when a couple of moments ago, and for us several weeks ago, Jesus had said someone would betray him, right? So Judas is present. It wasn't like he was in another room. He was in there, which makes this particular set of passages that much more peculiar, because for him to be sitting there, it's strange to think we get to where we get to, right? A good phrase, this is very literary, is Luke 22:21. But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table. That almost sounds like modern poetic writing in literature, right? The sort of sounds Shakespearean, because it's such a powerful statement. We could spend the entire class just analyzing that sentence because it's so strong. But basically what it's saying is, I'm eating with my betrayer. That's profound, because this is the Last Supper. This is the institution of the Lord's Supper, the last time he'll celebrate Passover with them. They're supposing that Jesus is telling Judas to leave quickly and do what he's going to do. Some of them because they think Judas is being instructed to buy something for the feast. Jesus won't make it to the feast, right? Like this, what they're celebrating, Jesus is not, this is it. There's no more. He won't make it to the day of Pentecost with them. Like, this is it. So just that statement that the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table is so powerful. We don't have time. It's not in one of our questions, but it's something that you can really dive into. And like I said several weeks ago, when we first looked at the prophecy of Judas betraying him, you can look at different pieces of literature throughout human history in various cultures and see the betraying of someone by someone else who is very close to them. And there's famous literary passages and lines based off of those acts that you may have studied in school in different levels of your scholastic studies. So that's one thing. Also, our author is letting us know that this meal has starting and ending points in terms of what they're celebrating. In the second paragraph, it says, Jesus reiterated the woe that he had spoken previously in the Passover meal, because the Passover meal is over. Then he established the Lord's Supper, and now he's talking to them, right? So that's just a distinction that we looked at last week. That's just reiterating that for us this week. There's a distinction between them celebrating the Passover meal and Jesus instituting the Lord's Supper, something that we looked at last week. Many of the congregation struggled with when they started to remember the Lord's Supper on Sunday. The main or the biggest offender of that's written down is a church in Corinth. They were so focused on eating a meal every week, they weren't paying attention and remembering Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection properly, or remembering their own relationship with God through that sacrifice, or even waiting for one another to get there in time. So this is just another instance of that, to just remind yourself that there is a clear distinction in the room between the Passover meal and the Lord's Supper. We won't go into that because we spent last week's class on that. The disciples still don't know who's going to betray Jesus, even after he said it this second time, even after he is asked by John, who is being alluded to in the book of John as the disciple that Jesus loved. John is not mentioning his name. Peter signals to John, hey, ask Jesus who he's referring to. So John asked him. Jesus said it's going to be the one who I give this piece of bread after I dip it in the dish. Even though Jesus does that, John's passage tells us that at that time, they didn't know who Jesus was referring to, right? They didn't know it was Judas. After Judas leaves, they're going to dispute over who's greatest. We did that 3 Wednesdays ago, or 2 Wednesdays ago, excuse me. Had they known that Judas would have betrayed them, it's a good guesstimate that violence would have broke out. And how we know that is 2 reasons. One is because they're arguing very quickly after this who's going to be the greatest, which means they were already ranking themselves as a hierarchy. And Peter cut off one of the guards' ears. Now you have to keep in mind that the guards were carrying weapons, and there was way more guards than there were disciples. So just imagine what would have happened in a small room had they fully been aware of what Judas was going to do. So just keep in mind that John is writing this, but he's recapping a story that he lived, which is also profound. Think about how difficult it would have been for John to pen these things, right? Because he was there. So you're remembering the night where your Lord and Savior was betrayed and you didn't know about it in advance, even though he told you in advance, you just didn't know, right? Like, what could you have done to prevent it is something that maybe you would be thinking about. And then the last thing to just recap from this reading is these sentences that Jesus says in John 13, 31 and 32. The Son of Man has been glorified and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify the Son and he will glorify him immediately. And we'll get into that, questions 4 and 5. All right, I have a couple of comments about Satan. I'll hold those for question 2 though. So before we get to question 2, I'm just going to give some quick insight on some of the background of what's happening here. But let's start with question 1. Do you think Jesus could have done anything or said anything that would have dissuaded Judas from betraying him? Could he have done anything that would have changed Judas's mind? Right? right? Now we're supposing. Keep in mind that this is a trick question because God is outside of time. So God allows you to exercise your own free will. Your free will won't supersede his divine will. But keep in mind that James says that God is not evil. So he's not tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone by evil. But each person is drawn away when they are pulled away by their own sinful desires, right? So just keep that in mind. Plus, keep in mind, Judas already met with the high priest and had already got the dollar amount in or worked out in which he would get to betray Jesus. So this was already a motion. But the question is, could Jesus have said anything to change Judas's mind? And I would throw in there and just jump starting that conversation is, would Jesus had said anything to change Judas's mind? Could he have and would he have? I would add in there. Our book is only saying could he have, but I'd ask you to think about could and would, right? Would he have wanted to change Judas's mind, or was there a greater purpose? And could he have changed Judas's mind? Right? Could Jesus have forced Judas to not betray him? And again, keep in mind, this is a trick question, right? Could Jesus have forced Judas to not betray him? That's basically what we're asking. Could he have changed his mind? And then would he have wanted to? Both of those questions. Yes, Brother Ricardo.
Yeah. We're talking about Jesus here. We're talking about God who's all powerful. You mentioned earlier outside of time and everything. So could he have changed Judas's mind, or should or would? He's God, right? I think, yeah, absolutely. He's God. There isn't anything that he can't do. But that wasn't the purpose, right? That wasn't the goal. Judas had to serve his purpose. And you mentioned earlier, he already met with them. So Judas already made his bet and he was gonna land it. And it speaks to us now too. When we think we're in control of things, when we think we control anything at all, we don't. There's nothing that we control. We just have to ask God and speak with God, and that His will would be done, because that's what's gonna happen anyway. But Judas had made his bet, and Judas was already serving his purpose. Now, are we serving our purpose? Are we serving the purpose that God has for us? And are we interacting with God on the things that He has for us, in store for us? And so again, to answer the question, yes, He's God. There's nothing that He can't do, but He wasn't gonna do it because it needed to happen. It needed to happen because He formed it like that. He made it like that. But could He have changed it? Yes, because He's God. But He wouldn't have done it because that wasn't the purpose. That wasn't the goal.
Yeah, good. I mean, we can just pick out a couple of physical miracles, right? Remember, we're in a room. So Jesus walked on water. I'm pretty sure He could have locked the door, right? He was able to move in and out of the door. Remember, they're going to be, after He died, they're going to be in a room. The door's going to be locked and He's going to walk right through. He could do that, right? Judas can't walk through the door. I'm sure Judas could have broke the door down, right? But the reason why I was saying it's a trick question is, to Brother Ricardo's point, is would He do it is for a greater purpose. And then also think about the changing of Judas's mind, right? Jesus could have locked the door, but if Jesus locked the door and prevented him from going that night to betray him, would that have changed Judas's mind, right? Think about you. When you want to do what you want to do, can somebody change your mind, right? Like, I'm sure people try, right? So keep in mind that God will never force you to love Him, right? That alone is profound, right? We don't think that much from that angle. I don't think. I'm just assuming, but I don't think we spend a lot of time thinking about that, right? But God isn't going to force you to love Him, force you to follow Him, force you to do the right thing. That's your own choice. He can put things in your pathway to encourage you and to discourage you from falling away from Him. But at the end of the day, it's your free will. Locking the door just would have discouraged, but it wouldn't have prevented, right? Because remember, Jesus Himself preached about the difference between doing something and thinking about it already in your mind and your heart, right? Remember, he was saying, if you hate your brother, you already committed murder in your heart. So just keep that in mind. Sister Karen?
Yes, I was going to talk about free will, that God has given us free will from the beginning of time, right? So if you think about it, he could have allowed Adam and Eve to not sin, and everything would have been perfect, right? But he allowed them from the beginning. He said, I'm giving you a choice, and he gave us a choice. And then also, God had a plan for the world, and it was all stemmed on free will and us obeying his will and honoring him as the Father and the creator of the universe. That was his plan. So if he had stopped anything from happening, it would have defeated the whole purpose of his whole plan, right? So everything that would have happened from the beginning of time would have been different. The world as it exists now would not have existed, because then God would have been in control of every single thing that we do and stop everything bad from happening to make everything perfect. And then what? Then there would be no choices or nothing, because God would be, I mean, what's the point of that? Because that wasn't God's plan. So basically everything is according to God's plan, and he could have done whatever he wanted to, but he didn't, because he wants us to choose to serve him. And again, don't forget also that what started this whole thing too, the devil and his angels, right? That decided to disobey God and decide to start their own thing. So basically, if that didn't happen either, then there would be no choices.
Yeah, I mean, good point. I mean, remember in Philippians 2, verse 8, it says that Jesus, being found in appearance as a man, humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even to death on the cross. Even though in Colossians it tells us, and John chapter 1, really, that all things were made through him and for him, and by him all things hold together, right? Even though we know Jesus is that important, right? But in terms of the plan of salvation, at this moment in time, Jesus is humbling himself to the order of things. That is profound and is its own study. See, he's not putting himself above the plan. The plan involves this in real time. See, so like this is the plan, right? Like Sister Karen is saying, this is already the plan. So I'm not gonna supersede the plan. I'm not above the plan. I'm actually a part of the plan. I stepped into time for the last 33 and a half years, right? So now I'm subject to the plan. I'm humble to the plan. See, this plan is going to lead to death, and that's the plan. I can't all of a sudden supersede the plan, because the plan will break. And then what was the point of all of that? See, that's what we're saying. That's why it's a trick kind of question, because he has to go through the motions in real time. And he also has to protect the plan, which is why I was saying, notice the disciples don't fully know what he's talking about, or we can only guess that violence would have broke out, and then that would have stopped the plan, right? So the plan is above all, even in a few hours, above his agony and above his dismay. The plan still has to be number one at this time. Brother Rod?
Well, I'm going to go one step backwards. Judas should have been the one that changed his own mind. After sitting at the table with all the men, and Jesus goes and says, the one who I give the bread to will be the one that is going to betray me. Well, I don't know where their minds was at or where their eyes was at, well, even their hearing. But Judas still wasn't realizing what was going on after everything was all said. What he does, he takes the bread and he leaves. Then all the other men should have realized, well, this is the one that's going to betray him. So I think Judas is the one that should have changed his own mind. Then he wouldn't have been in the predicament that he was in.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you, thank you for that. Because if you go to, in other passages, we looked at this already, but if you go to just chapter 13, right before this, just remember what Judas was already in the room experiencing. Let's just pick the one physical event, right? Let's say you missed the application of the Lord's Supper, right? Let's say your mind was already somewhere else. So let's skip that one, even though that's the main one, right? But let's go to the washing of the feet. And remember, when he gets to Peter, Peter sees what he's doing and said, Lord, are you washing my feet? And Jesus says, what I'm doing, you don't understand now, but you will after this. And he said, you'll never wash my feet. And Jesus said, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Peter says, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. Now, keep in mind, if you're Judas, immediately I would be like, you know, when you did something or you're about to do something, it usually be older people. And people start alluding to stuff and you start thinking, man, how do you know I did that or I'm about to do that? Already, if I'm Judas, I would be kind of off my game. See? Because like now I'm confused, like how he talking to me or is somebody else doing something? Like, because I know what I did, I know what I'm about to do. Then Jesus said, so when he had washed their feet, that means he touched Judas's feet and took his garments and sat down. He said, do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord. You say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you to do them. If Jesus washing Judas's feet and telling him, along with the others, that they need to love one another the same way Jesus loved them, if that didn't change Judas's mind, just Jesus saying, whoever I give this bread to is going to betray me, and then Judas do what you're going to do quickly, that's not going to change his mind either, right? Because the washing of the feet is such an act of love. Even if Judas entered the Passover with pure hate in his heart, that should have got him off of his game, see, off of his focus, off of his plan, because it's such a contrary display of love than the display of hate. It's a polar opposite. So if that didn't penetrate his heart, why would Jesus telling him now, this is the second time verbatim, the third or fourth time alluding to it in the same dinner, mind you, not over the course of 3.5 years. This is multiple times in the same dinner that he's alluding to someone betraying him, and you know you are going to betray him. If you've experienced this for the last however long it's been, let's just say several hours, this last statement is not going to change your mind. So to Brother's Rod point is really on Judas, right? It's not on Jesus to change his mind, right? Like Judas is the one who should have said, you know what? I'm not going to do this. I apologize. But he continued on with it. All right, Fritzinger family, go ahead. Oh, you're still muted.
There we go.
Okay, there we are.
Yes, now I hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so like Jesus washed the feet of everyone, including Judas. There's one more thing that he did, and it comes out of the King James version of the text. Because Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the text says Jesus dipped the bread with the one who he dipped the bread with is the one who would betray him. But in the King James version of John, it says Jesus dipped the sop, S-O-P. And S-O-P was part of the Jewish Passover meal. Let's see what it said. Passover meal contained 6 items: parsley, unleavened bread, matzah bread, bitter herb, horseradish, roasted egg, lamb shank, and charoset, which was a sweet mixture of pureed fruits, nuts, and honey. And there was also wine served in a series of 4 cups, and meaning you drank 4 full cups of wine during the meal. But what's interesting is that the end of the feast, the part called the Koresh, was this symbolic time where the participants would make a sandwich of matzah and horseradish, and they would dip that in the charoset. the sweet mixture. This, it might seem tasty to you, but they put a lot of horseradish on it, and it was extremely potent, and it could make your eyes water. So let's see. So Jesus, during the Lord's Supper, Jesus dipped the sop and gave it to Judas. And this is the man who had, who had betrayed him and kissed him. But let's see. So it was tradition that you gave the sop to someone you love for them to eat. So Jesus dipped the sop and gave it to Jesus.
Judas.
To Judas. I mean, and so again, like washing his feet, he was telling Judas that he loved him, in spite of the fact that he was soon going to betray him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is profound, right? Like this outward display of love. You're in this love feast. You're a part of this. You normally partake of this Passover meal with your family. Jesus is establishing this. If you haven't witnessed it, let's say in the last 2 Passovers, let's just say you didn't catch it. Now you can clearly see Jesus is making a huge deal about family and love, right? Even if you're upset, you can still see it. To not allow any of that to penetrate your heart means your heart is already hard, meaning you've already decided to do what you decided to do. If we start asking each person to testify on this call, I will say at least 50% of us, if we were honest, can say, yes, there's times where you were about to do something and it didn't matter who said something to, dissuade you or change your mind, you were already going to do it. It wasn't until you look back at what you did that you felt remorseful, right? Now, if you feel remorse before you do it, then that's a blessing because that's a way out. And you say, okay, I almost did something. That's a blessing, right? But we do and we know better. And then later we look back and say, oh, we shouldn't have done that, right? So Judas here is doing what he's made his mind up to do. And it shows you how powerful his mind is set on this, because even though he's experiencing this Passover meal, this Lord's Supper, the washing of the feet, these loving words, it's not penetrating. So that's something important. All right, let's talk about Satan, which is this question too. Satan entering Judas's heart. Did Satan force his way into Judas's heart, or did Judas welcome him? One thing that is implied here that's not explicit. Remember, Satan tried to tempt Jesus at the beginning of Jesus's ministry. You don't really hear that much of him throughout Jesus's ministry, book, chapter, and verse, which is interesting. And then you see that Satan enters Judas, which leads you to believe, as a point of inference, that even though Satan would want this to this entire process to go a different way, right? It still seems that he is limited in what he can and can't do, because why would he just use some of his trickery in some visual way? Well, why would he even have to be involving with Judas? You get my point? So that gets us to James, and there's a lot of references that we can use for James, but James talks about drawing near to God, and the devil will flee from you, right? This whole point of like, you got to pick a side. If you get close to God, then Satan isn't able to grab you, right? If you walk in the middle, or obviously if you walk closer to Satan, then you are already on his side, right? Just as a summary to that passage. But this is supporting that concept to say Satan is only going to be able to interact with those that allow him to interact with them. See? So it's not like, if you notice here, Satan's not getting into Peter, because Peter is professing that in a few minutes, he's saying he'll never betray Jesus. Now, we know they all betray Jesus. Of course, Peter is going to get the lion's share of that in our knowledge, because he denies him 3 times. But I always say, you have to remember, when Peter denies Jesus, it's after he watched Jesus allow the soldiers to put their hands on him. Like, we missed that part because like that confused him. See, there was times before when they tried to grab Jesus. Remember, Jesus miraculously just disappeared from them. So to see for the first time in 33 and a half years, the being that you believe to be all powerful allows someone to put their hands and take him away. See, I think we missed that, right? That's why his faith is shattered, because why are you doing that? Why you let them touch you like that? Why you let them take you away? See, but again, we'll get into that in a couple of weeks in the future when we get there. But anyway, so he's not entering into Peter at this time because Judas, I think Brother Ricardo was saying about him already making his bed. Judas's heart was already left from Jesus. See, so it's easy for Satan. There's a saying where it talks about, and this comes from one of the parables about cleaning up the house. But there's a saying, you clean up the house and you leave the door cracked open, and anyone can walk in and make their home there. Oh, the house clean. Let's make our home here. And this is sort of what we're talking about in this instance, right? This is why I go back to the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. This is why Jesus makes such a big deal about what's in your heart. See, look at that with tonight's class. He spent a lot of words on the Sermon on the Mount talking about focusing on what's in your heart and your mind first before you even get to what you do. He spent a lot. He talked about that with lust. He talked about that with hate. Talked about that with oaths. He talked about that with interacting with one another. He talked about that with love and marriages. He just kept reiterating this concept of what's inside counts, right? Before you even get to what you do, what you're doing comes from a place of what you're thinking and what you're pondering on inside. And that's what we get here. He comes to the feast, he being Judas, with betrayal in his heart, right? That he's breaking bread with Jesus, already deciding to betray him, right? So the question is, did Satan force him, right? Could he have an excuse to say, and again, this would be dating yourself. This is well past this is well into the mid 1900s, where there was a TV and radio show where there's a saying kept saying that the devil made me do it. Right? This was a popular phrase and concept, but that's what question is asking, right? Did Satan make Judas betray Jesus? Or can we apply that James passage and say, or even the parable of the house, but the James passage of when you're already too far away from God, you're too close to Satan. If that phrase makes sense, right? If you're too far away from God, by default, you're too close to Satan. That's a summary of James. Is if the Bible says draw near to God, then that means I'm close. And it just tells me that the devil has no dominion over me. So obviously the flip to that is, if the further I'm away from God, right, the more I give Satan opportunity, right? So that's what this question is asking. Any thoughts on this before we move on to question 3? Some of us at our points have already answered this, but I'll give us some time to touch on it.
Go ahead, speak.
So am I open?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Jesus twice told Judas that he loved him by washing his feet, but much more symbolically was the tradition of the meal to give the sop to the person with that gesture as a gesture of complete love. But as it turned out, Satan right away entered into Judas, and he went and did what he did, rendering Judas, powerless to accept and act on the love that was shown to him.
And see, that's why I was saying it's so critical when you start talking about that James passage, because the further you are away from God, right, the closer you are to Satan. Now we know from Peter's book that Satan walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. See, so you can hopefully see where I'm going with this. The further you are away from God, the easier it is for Satan to devour you. If you don't want Satan to devour you, you need to be closer to God. See, now I'm going to read really quick. I was already alluding to it, but it's worth reading. Our James passage, which is James chapter 1, verses 12 through 15. Blessed is the man who endures temptation. For when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I'm tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. For each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, brings forth death. That's really Judas, right? Judas had a desire. He was enticed and drawn away, right? Then, when this desire was conceived, it gave birth to sin. The sin happened already. That's what I'm making the point, right? The sin happened when he met with the high priest before the dinner happened, because he already in his heart decided to do something. That's what Jesus was saying. If you hate your brother, you already committed murder in your heart. See, you say, oh, I didn't kill anyone. No, not yet, but you already hate in your heart, and that's a sin. See, so that desire already gave birth. Now, he could have stopped it, but he allowed it when it's full grown, James says, to bring forth death. Now, this sin brought death twice. It brought death to Jesus, and Judas took this situation so bad, right, so hard, that it brought death to himself. Some sinful actions are that way. Some sin will kill you and someone else. Literally. That's what happened here. So this James passage is really also can be applied directly to Judas. That's why you have to be mindful and careful of your desires, because your desires could bring forth death spiritually and or physically, right? You got to be mindful of that. That's what I'm saying. You got to protect what you think about, what you ponder, what you say, what you do. You got to be careful, because the more you do wrong, the easier it will to continue to do wrong. And when you keep doing that, you give the devil a foothold in your life to use you as a vessel, right? Because again, Satan, we can infer throughout from the temptation to now, Satan was limited, right? He didn't just show. Why couldn't he just show himself and fight Jesus one-on-one like a movie, right? Notice that we're not there, right? We don't read anything like that. Right. So he's using those tools in which he has at his disposal, which sadly are people. That's what we're talking about. You don't want to be a tool for Satan. Right. Satan is using this tool, Judas, because Judas opened up his heart to sin. That's what we have to be careful of. That's what James in latter part of James is warning us not to do. OK, let's move on to question number 3. Jesus told Judas, what you're about to do quickly. Why did Jesus tell him that? What do you think? Sister Karen really touched on this already, but we'll still ask it. Why did Jesus tell him to go do it quickly? Think about the plan part. Right? Why would Jesus tell him that? Why would you want someone to betray you quickly? Seems kind of weird. If you can remember back, think about what Sister Karen was talking about, the plan. Yes, Sister Karen, since you had the comment, you tell us again.
Yes, if nobody else is answering.
Yeah, you tell us
he
again.
told him to do it quickly, just to get it over with. Get it over with so we can proceed with the plan. Okay, because you have to do all this so that I can die, so that I can give you guys life, so that I can send the comforter, so that all of this stuff is related. Right, so go ahead so we can proceed with God's plan, so that if you think about it too, from Jesus' perspective, I'm sure Jesus was happy to save us, but I'm almost sure part of him wanted to go back to his Father in heaven, where it was much nicer and wonderful and more peaceful and everything, where there's no sin. And also Jesus wanted to go back so that he could advocate on our behalf, right? So again, look at the entire plan again.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, that's why I like how the passage said it was night this do quickly is also literally, right? Like you don't have much time. Take yourself out of the room and think about what time it is. Keep in mind, all of this has to be done before sundown Friday, right? So you don't have a lot of time. Now, no one knows that but Jesus, right? But you do have to do it quick because he's about to speak a little bit longer, right? He's going to go to the garden and pray, and that's it. That is seen pretty quick, right? Like it's still going to be the middle of the night. It won't even be morning time. Think about that. That's quick. Like it is quick, right? Because now everything that has been planned is about to start happening very fast, right? That's the point. This has been planned before the foundation of the world and set in motion since the fall of man in Genesis and every generation. But see, now we're done prophesying, alluding to, speaking around. Now these things are going to happen. See, you're about to start reading the documentation of these events now, not the prophecy of the plan of salvation. You're about to start reading the next several Wednesdays, literally what happened. See, so time to do it quick. Like we're here now. We're at this time of all the waiting to get here. We're here. So it's time to do what you're going to do. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Satan's going to do what he's going to do. God's going to do what he's going to do. See, all the pieces are in motion. And now Jesus is going to act out these things in which he already knows will happen. Brother Stanley?
It's Sister Stanley.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, you said actually what I was going to say as well. Like when you think about the agony, Jesus knew what he was facing, and he knew that there was going to be a separation between him and God. And so just think about, when you're waiting for something to happen, if you know it's going to be bad, whatever it may be, you want it to happen so that it can be done quickly. You want it over, right? You don't want it to happen, but it's going to happen, so you just want it over. You'll hear people say, well, I just as soon get it over with now. And I think it was on such a deeper level, that separation from God. And Jesus knew that this had to be done. So if it's going to be done, do it quickly, because my Father already has plans and things in motion to proceed from there. So it wasn't, like do it quickly because I can't wait, in anticipation for something great. It was more do it quickly because this is going to be very difficult for me to withstand. But I know that this has to take place because I need to get back to my Father.
Yeah, I mean, the time, we don't, and when I say these sort of sentences like we don't, I'm not saying like verbatim you, just in general, but it's hard for us to put our mind around the concept of time and God. We don't, this part I'm definitely saying, we don't fully understand that. See, it's hard to fathom creating time, meaning you're outside of it, and then stepping in time. Right? Like he's talking in real time, but also for future tense. That's like, we don't normally talk that way, right? We talk about things today, maybe tomorrow, maybe a little bit in the future, but not generations later, right? We don't normally speak like this. See, so it's hard to understand it, which is why the apostles are so confused, right? Even after Judas leaves and Jesus starts talking about where he's going, they're confused because people don't talk like this. So it's hard to understand what he's saying, but he's speaking just a little amount of words because time is going by, right? We're getting to the point where Jesus is going to say, look, my betrayer is at hand. See, you don't have 12 hours from right now. That's not a lot of time. Right? You don't have 12 hours from right now where he's going to say, look, wake up, look, here they come, like they're coming after a robber. See, like the disciples are going to be caught off guard. They're tired. It's in the nighttime. We just ate. Like, I can't focus. And then all of a sudden now they're taking Jesus away. Now I'm completely awake And what are we going to do? See, time is gone now, right? You imagine again, John writing this, thinking back like, wow, when he said quickly, he wasn't lying. Look how quick that happened, right? That's like a blur. Ever go through something traumatic overnight? You just think like, I mean, I know 24 hours went by, but it's like a blur, right? Like I can't even remember every moment, or it just, traumatic things have a way of superseding time, right? It's hard to fathom the time, even though you know the seconds and the minutes and the hours went by. The trauma is what supersedes, the event is what supersedes, right? That's what's happening here. Like you're outside of time, but you're in time. And for us, we're reading about it, right? So we're thinking about, wow, I wonder what the apostles were thinking, or I wonder what Jesus was thinking. I wonder what Judas was thinking, right? I wonder what Satan was thinking, right? Did he think he really had a chance? Or see, like we're just thinking about these things because we're just reading about events for something that was already prophesied about. But now finally, whenever we reread this in scripture, we're always to the point of, oh, wow, this really happened. Of all the Old Testament prophecy, look, it's happening. I wonder what happened, right? Like, I wonder what happened moment by moment during the Last Supper, because the events are so profound. I wonder what happened hour by hour, like literally what happened, because it's such a big deal. All right, let's look at the next two questions together. How had Jesus been glorifying God? What do you think? Jesus said that God would glorify the Son at once. Did Jesus expect that God would glorify the Son by raising him from the dead on the third day? Remember, Jesus was baptized. A voice said, this is my son who I'm well pleased, listen to him. Right. And then similar decree happened when there was a transfiguration and they said, oh, look, we should build some temples. We got a lot of historically great, religiously great figures here. Right. And the voice is saying, you need to listen to my son. That's the great figure here. Oh, right. So like in that being said, we know, God is already telling you how important Jesus is. A couple of comments already alluded to this. So all throughout this, right, this 33 and a half years, how is Jesus glorifying God? Because Jesus said that. So how, in what ways, right? There's no one specific answer, but let's just get a couple. In what ways?
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, you go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay, so you alluded to this, is that at the point where Judas leaves the room, that's the major turning point. That's when the Lord's Supper is instituted. From that point, people remember, that's when Jesus' earthly ministry is basically ended, and next event is his glorification on the cross. So at that one turning point, our Christ is saved, our Christ is glorified, and our salvation is secured.
Yeah, the steps are in motion now. The only thing that you have from Judas leaving is Jesus promising this helper to those who are left, right? These 11, and him praying for himself, the plan for the disciples who will be apostles, for those that will believe. And then look, here comes Judas. And Judas gonna reach out his arms and kiss him, and it's over, right? That over, when I say that, means the climax of the plan is Jesus' death, burial, and his resurrection. But his death now, it will become the focal point from this moment on, right? Everything now in just a few hours will lead up to his death. So this is, remember, the wages of sin is death. Don't ever forget that. See? So like until Jesus dies, that full glorification hasn't happened yet, because sin equals death. There's no way around it. Something has to die, which is why God had instituted the giving of sacrifices, so that people could see death was a requirement for the wrong that you did. This animal is innocent. So you should feel bad when you see that animal you brought dying for the things that you did. See, that was why those Old Testament, the old law was a tutor. You are already supposed to understand that as human beings. See, so when you move to this and see that's Jesus, the ultimate lamb, he have no sin, but he has to become sin, which means he has to taste death or there is no life for any of us. That's just the plan, right? That's the way God designed this plan. Therefore, when Judas leaves to do what he is going to do, which is allow the high priest to get to Jesus, because they don't know what Jesus looked like. There's no phones, there's no cameras, there's no TV, there's no internet. Jesus looked like everybody else, right? He could have been any one of these disciples. And there's so many people in the city. I told you, be almost more than 1 million people in Jerusalem during Passover. How I know which room Jesus in? Right? Like, I don't know. So when Judas brings us directly to Jesus, now we have our chance. They've been trying to kill Jesus for years, and now they have it. And therefore, this glorification, because God's anger will now focus from all humanity, past, present, and future, on one person, which is Jesus. Think about that for a second. So when Jesus says, and we're getting ahead of ourselves, God, why have you forsaken me? All of that sin is culminating on Jesus, right? I can't, we have no relationship right now because God and darkness cannot coexist. See, we don't understand what these passages mean. We don't understand how big of a deal this is because we deny ourselves. You know how you say you'll never do something and you do it? Peter said that, right? Next week class, we're going to look at that. Peter going to say he never going to do something, and in less than 12 hours, he about to do it. We do that all the time, but God isn't that way. Remember, God said, what am I, a man that I'm going to lie like y'all? I don't lie. See, God never denies himself. See? So the one time God would not be in communication with himself, that has to be profound. The reason why we as humanity miss that because we deny ourselves every day. So it's not that big of a deal to us. But it was a big deal for God to forsake Jesus. It was a big deal for Jesus to become sin. It was a big deal for all of these events that Judas is going to kickstart happen between God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. This was a big deal. See, but that big deal involves glorifying God because of God's will. See, when God's will is done, he's glorified, right? That's also scripture as well. This is God's will. So when he's saying not my will, but your will be done, that's why we should pray that way, because we may have a different will, but we should pray that God's will be done, because when God's will is done, God is glorified. See, so we got to make sure our minds are that way. Sometimes you may see something and say, I don't want to do this, but this looked like this is God's will. But if it was my will, I would not do this. Like, seriously, you may come to a point in your life where you verbalize that. If you do it and it's God's will, God is glorified. Especially because you know you didn't want to do it. So you know you did that out of what? Love. Because if it was up to you, you would not have done it. Right? Maybe if we asked each other, some people could testify to that. Yeah, it was something I had to do. I didn't want to do that. If it was up to me, I never would have did that. I only did that because I knew book, chapter, and verse God would be pleased by it. But if it was up to my book, chapter, and verse, I never would have did that. See, that's love. That's the outpour of love, to sacrifice your own will for God's will. That's a sacrifice. So when the Bible tells us to be living sacrifices, see, we're supposed to take the sacrifice that we see in Christ. He died physically so we wouldn't have to, so we can sacrifice our will, our emotion, our finances, our desires, like these sort of things that we hold more dear than our own life. Sad to say, people hold their own desires higher than they do their own human life. Jesus is saying, I'm not calling you to sacrifice yourself to kill yourself. All I'm asking you is to deny your desires for me. And I'm not even saying to do it all the time. He could say do it all the time. But there is going to be a time and place with in your life where you're going to have to not do what you want to do something for the cause of Christ. Right? And what will you choose? Will you pray, you know, God, I don't want to do this, but not my will, your will be done? Or will you do it and then ask for forgiveness later? See, that's the difference between us and God. All right. Any closing comments? You don't have to stay within question 4 or 5, but any closing comments, whether on glorification or any of the other points earlier?
Yeah. Comment on question 2 about Satan entering Judas's heart. I mean, I think this question is should make us think a lot about, you know, our lives and, you know, our relationship with God and things like that, because, you know, at any point, if we leave any room and any space for Satan, he will infiltrate us. He will penetrate our hearts and our place and try to cause confusion. You said earlier, he's moving around moving like a roaring lion, looking for anyone to devour. That's his job. Like, that's literally what he's there to do. So he will use anything possible. That may be your wife, your husband, your brother, your sister, your coworker. So he's gonna use anything possible. Satan doesn't play fair. Like, he could care less. He will use anything at all to cause you to fall. And so when we look at our lives and our relationship with Christ, we should be looking at the loopholes that we have and the weaknesses that we have, and try to sharpen those and to strengthen those and to close those little loopholes that we have in our lives, where he can come in, where he can cause confusion, where he can come in and cause chaos, because that's literally what he's looking for. So when you talk about Satan entering his heart and stuff like that, and then he's forced his way, introduces his heart. Yeah, Judas was already far gone, but yes, Satan is gonna force his way into you, just like he did with Judas. He's gonna find a way, something, any loophole, any little thing that he can, to try to enter your heart and cause you to fall, and cause you to be against God and go against God. So again, that speaks volume to our lives today, because that's literally what he's doing. He's going around like a roaring lion, looking for anything and anyone to devour.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we have to be mindful of, because we don't want to be an asset to Satan, which will make us a liability to the kingdom, right? A lot of people who followed Jesus knew who Jesus was and what he looked like, right? You didn't need one of the 12 to point out Jesus, right? A lot of people could have betrayed Jesus, right? But Satan used someone who was closest. See, like, that's why I said there's a lot of literary examples of this in human literature. See, because this is a profound point that the world is not lost on. Even movies to this day touch on this, right? Like, betrayal hurts worse when it's somebody closest to you. If someone you don't like and they don't like you does something, that's expected, right? It may hurt you, but it's still expected, right? It's when someone that you love hurts you, right? That is most painful. And people typically hurt those who they claim to love the most, right? You talked about husband and wives. Husband and wives hurt each other more than anyone else on earth. That's a fact. The hurt you would get from your husband and wife is unlike any hurt you'd get from a stranger on the street. They don't know enough about you to hurt you the same way a spouse could. Your child will hurt you more than other people in the world. Because what could I mean, I barely know you. Well, I mean, I guess I could find something to hurt you with, but your own child, see, like, these are sort of things that we don't think about as much, but it's worth thinking about, because you don't want to be that person, right? You don't want to be that option for Satan, that you've moved so far away from God that now Satan could use you to get to others. This is why I usually say for those of us who have people in our own physical house that don't follow God, you got to make sure that you put your faith above them, because they will pull you down. Satan will use them to get to you. See, because they're gone already. Right? So Satan, no, I can't stop Ellis from going to church. So instead, I'm going to make it difficult for him to go to church. How? Well, I guess I can make his car break down or this, that, and the third, but that's just temporary. Instead, I'll disrupt the peace of where he lived. And then after a while, he's going to have to make a decision. Does he worship only to come back home and constantly have to be fighting with those that are in the house? Or does he just give up and worship? See, some Christians have to think about that and weigh those options every Sunday. See? But the people who Satan are using in the house, do they view themselves as a tool for Satan? No, right? They don't come up to you and say, hey, Satan using me to get to you. But think about that. Like, he already tried to get to Jesus directly and it didn't work. So he's trying another way. This way is going to work, though. See, I couldn't get to you, so I got to one of the people you picked. You picked him. I didn't pick him. I could have picked a random person to point Jesus out. But you picked this guy. You let Judas close to you. I didn't let him close to you. What did I do? I'm just walking around earth. You chose him. You picked him. You loved him. Brother David just said he loved him. You loved him. I didn't tell you to love this guy. You did. You washed his feet. Did I force you to wash his feet? No. You knew what he was doing with money. You still let him hold the money. This is your fault. See what Satan is saying? You did this. What did I do? This goes back to the conversation between God and Job. This guy gonna curse you. See, and this is why you don't want to become an embarrassment to God and do something so that Satan will laugh at God, to be like, these are the people that you were crying out. I was watching you cry out on the cross for these people. Look what they're doing. They can't even remember Lord's Supper every Sunday. You were crying out. You was crying so loud, people were laughing. Don't you remember people were laughing at you? Remember people spitting at you? They don't remember. I do. See, we miss this because we're not thinking spiritually, right? But what if those are the type of conversations that Satan had? I never told you I'll remember this. They told you. They promised they will remember this every week. And look, they're sleeping. They're literally asleep, and you were crying out. You were thirsty. They were giving you vinegar. And look, anybody remembering that? See, these are the things that you should take away from a study like this and bring them in remembrance when it's Sunday morning. So you think, oh yeah, wow, I gotta do better because I'm not focused enough on the actual sacrifice, right? The Bible talks about making sure that we don't treat Jesus's sacrifice as a common occurrence, right? Something regular. You don't want to live a life where Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection is just regular. Like, oh, okay, so, and then also the sun rose today. So what? See, because if it becomes routine and mundane, it'll lose its impact on you. That's what that passage is saying. So when we look at these type of scriptures tonight, we don't want to be the Judas in the room, right? We would rather be the John and these other disciples. Yes, in the short term, they're all going to betray Jesus, correct. But in the long term, who would you rather align yourself with? What frame of mind you want to align yourself with, right? Judas's action is going to bring death to both Jesus and himself. Peter's betrayal is not going to bring death to Peter because he's going to be renewed, because he's going to allow God to renew him. See, Judas is doing things outside of God's movement in his life. See, he's not allowing God to do anything with him or to him or for him anymore. He's running rogue. And that's what we want to be careful of. So just keep that in mind as we go throughout the next several days, and Lord willing, we make it to Sunday. Just make sure you're not running rogue from God's will in the kingdom, right? What are you doing? What are you thinking about? What are you speaking? every day, is it in alignment with God or is it far from God? Because the farther away you go, the closer you are to Satan, which gives him an opportunity. All right. Anyone else before we close?
Ellis?
Yes, go ahead.
So Judas' fault was a lust. He was totally overwhelmed by the lust that he saw from his action. And there are lots of human behaviors that are similar. There's like getting revenge, or like being angry, or sexual lust, that if you take it to its resolution, you've done a sin just as bad as what Judas did. You realize, if you realize you saw the lust, you saw the revenge, you saw the anger, and you didn't turn and take the better route, you did what Judas did. And every time you do that, you could say, Catholic Church says you're crucifying Christ over and over again. But it's true. You have all the tools right there in the Bible in front of you to not do the lust, not do the anger, not do the revenge or whatever. Mm-hmm. And yet you do it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Willfully. Yeah, that's true. I mean, we have to make it personal, right? That's the application. Really, the hidden sixth question, right, is more of a thought, not a question. Is now you have to take the study and make it personal, right? And say, in what ways am I Judas, right? In what ways am I betraying Jesus willfully, right? In what ways am I experiencing love, but my anger supersedes love, right? Like every day, there's great things to be witnessed, right? Sunset, sunrise, flowers blooming, children. Like there's so many beautiful things, animals, nature, like they're everywhere. But people are more focused on sinful things than fruits of the spirit. See? So sometimes we're so angry, we don't even allow a kind word, a smile that a stranger offers, or even a scripture to penetrate our anger at the moment. So we got to think about that. All right. Thank you for everyone's comments, everyone's participation. Much appreciated. This was also a heavy study. So if you like a personal Bible study or another deep dive at some of the scriptures or questions, please let us know. If you're watching on YouTube, you can contact us. Our contact information is in the video. We'll gladly set up some time to go over these scriptures with you in greater detail. Lord willing, next week, we will continue on and we'll be looking at chapter 153, which is Simon Peter's denial. All right. If you're on with YouTube, this is where we'll end. We pray that God will bless you, guide, guard, and keep you in all things. We pray that you have a blessed rest of your evening and that all will be well in your life. Thank you so much again for participating and joining with us.